Hi, I'm Allyson Szabo, and I'm the author of the Taylor Mage novels. I have two books, one that's out right now called Bloodstone, and the second one, which is called Blood Water, which will be out very briefly as soon as the current emergency is under a bit more control. um, I have a short story called Through the Fire that is in the fifth anthology of Clarion Call, and so I have been asked to read to you guys, and I decided to do a bedtime story. So this is an excerpt from Through the Fire. Antonia watched Pietro from the shadows, one pale hand against the cool brick of the building, the other holding her veil in place over her face. He was so passionate. Yet he was a Jew, the son of a moneylender. The Jews were outsiders, of course, confined to the ghetto, less than human. His faith was strong, though. She could see that. He radiated strength of spirit, even though he was not a Christian. And he was beautiful, despite being older. He would make a phenomenal guardian, she had decided, a servant of God and a protector of man. Tonight, she would speak to him, convince him to become one of the guardians of Venice. Pietro had no idea he was being observed, as he stood in the main square watching the flames rise higher and higher. The heat was blistering, reddening his face as he shifted closer and closer. He had tucked his hair up into the red hat that was the required mark of a Jew within the borders of Venice. The pile of precious books was burning into holy ash, ash that marked his face as his tears left streaky tracks down his cheeks. Antonia hung on to his words as he muttered another prayer in Hebrew. He dashed forward once more, trying to rescue one of the books, a single precious book of the Talmud or the Torah, to carry forward. The word of God burned before him, and his heart hammered in his chest from the horror of it all. Antonia savored that heartbeat. It was strong, and echoed above the other sounds in the expansive square. As the flames danced and the pages of flowing Aramaic script burned, she wondered if this dark-eyed, sombered man could love her with the depth that she loved him. There were dozens of other humans in the plaza, all oblivious to her presence. Some wandered aimlessly, and others stumbled by, sometimes sobbing, other times shrieking of coming doom. The darkness hid her slight form, and special prayers protected her from their gaze regardless. Her fingers played across the glass beads at her throat, which was anointed with her own blood. It was the recipient of the protection prayer which kept her hidden from human eyes. When she had died and been reborn, one of the blessings she had been gifted with was the ability to use blood to hide herself and others. A drop of blood, a spoken prayer, and a holy sigil sketched in the air, and none of the humans could see her. It was a useful talent, and allowed her to move among the streets and canals of Venice without concern. Most of those she could see in the plaza, were Jewish, but a handful of Christians looked on. They made sure that the Jews didn't rescue their literature from the purifying flames. A loud clatter stole her attention as nearby canvas awning collapsed in flames. Several of the onlookers kicked it into the pile of burning books, away from other things that might burn. Antonia used the distraction to dart several doorways over, toward Pietro. She sought to be closer to that loud, pumping heart, as her own blood sang in unison with his. A priest tossed handfuls of bound pages onto the already large pile as Pietro stood there. He drew back, almost until his back touched the wall of the building Antonia was crouching beside. She hitched her veils into place, practiced fingers, pinning them so they would not fall if she had to run. She reached out to him, ready to snatch him and carry him away from the inferno before them. She was about to grab and subdue him when he rushed forward, an anguished cry ripping from his smoke-damaged lungs. Her hands flew to cover her mouth, stifling her own scream as he plunged into the flames. What was he doing? In the name of all that was holy, was he sacrificing himself? No, he was coming out now, covered in ash. The fire was licking demonically at his clothing, his hair, and his body. Clutched to his chest was a single tome, singed only at the edges. Antonia shook her head, tears in her eyes. The priests hadn't seen him because of the thick black smoke that was now billowing out of the pile. Pietro made it 3 steps before falling to his knees, choking on the acrid vapors filling his lungs. He collapsed to the cobblestones, book still grasped in a death grip. As Antonia listened intently, his heart skipped a beat, tried to continue, and then stopped. She had no more time to make her decision. There was no time to ask him what he wanted. If she would save him, she needed to do it immediately. She waited only half a breath, then darted out of the shadows and snatched the arm of his coat. He was larger than her, though not by much, but he was a lot heavier. Her prayers and faith gave her strength, and she dragged him into a darkened walkway south of the square. She smothered the remaining flames and embers, listening all the while for his heartbeat. She heard nothing. With a soft sigh and a glance around to be certain they were alone, she leaned over his prone body and bit into his neck. The hot gush of his blood suffused her mouth, and her eyes shut with the ecstasy of it. She had dreamed of this moment for months, the eroticism of his vital force filling her. She had not fantasized about making him like her, though. She hadn't dared. Now there was no choice. She flipped him to his back and pried open his mouth, then bit her own wrist, letting her blood drip into his mouth. For the long span of 10 or 12 breaths, nothing happened. There was only the furor of the abused Jewish people in the nearby square and the occasional skitter of one of the ever-present rodents. She watched him, lips pursed into a thin line, desperate for it to work. She had seen it done, but had never created another one like herself before. Her own maker was gone, somewhere else in the world, and the only other revenants she knew were worshippers of Satan. She had no dealings with them and their infernal celebrations, their indiscriminate killing. And then it happened. A twitch. That was all the confirmation she required. Antonia scanned the area around her once more, not with eyes alone, but with all senses extended. She heard and felt nothing, and suspected all attention was on the burning holy text behind her. She scrambled to her feet, then lifted Pietro's bulky body as if he were a child. Embracing him tightly, the hard cover of his precious holy book pressed against her chest, she sprinted into the night. There you have it, the opening words of Through the Fire, and that is also the beginning of the origin story of a new vampire that I talk about in the second book. So if you're interested in vampires with a little bit of snark, okay, a lot of snark, and a little bit different from the average, then please check me out. I'm M, as in Michelle, Allyson, Allyson, Szabo, Szabo, on Facebook, and my website is mallysonszabo, all one word, .weebly.com. Thanks for listening, guys, and have a great night.